Welcome to The Faithful Steward. This is a podcast all about sharing biblical wisdom and practical insights in order to help church leaders pursue and teach financial freedom as part of Christian discipleship. We believe this is a spiritual conversation, and this is a place where the church needs to lead the way in order to move our communities forward in how we steward God's resources. I'm your host, James Lenhoff, and I am so passionate about this conversation and helping leaders have the confidence to step into it. We believe that if we help people thrive financially and grow spiritually, it changes everything. And I am so excited to join you on this journey. This podcast is brought to you by Good Sense. If you'd like more information about what we're up to, you can go to our website at goodsensemovement.org. All right, let's get started with today's conversation. Today, we're going to finish up our conversation for this month on how to talk about money. You know, last time we talked about that higher level congregational conversation, how to engage the full church in stewardship conversation. And today we're going to talk about that more granular level one-on-one coaching relationship that a lot of the people in our churches will need. If this is not part of your ministry design, if you as a church really have not invested in or built any kind of infrastructure to support one-on-one mentoring in this financial space, we would love to help you build that out. It's something, again, at Good Sense, we are really passionate about both of these conversations, that higher level congregational discussion, but also how do you actually walk this out in a way that's healthy, that doesn't create codependency, that doesn't expect more from the coach and burn them out? And also, how do we make sure we're creating progress in these conversations, that people don't just stay stuck even though they're getting coaching? And so financial coaching is the solution to the fact that we can't address the specific needs of individuals, particularly when they're in crisis, when they have circumstances that are really complex and nuanced. We can't give a one-size-fits-all prescription to all of the people in our congregation. And so it takes a more specific and more intentional relational conversation with those families through a coaching, mentoring kind of relationship. And that, in our opinion, is the healthiest way to carry this out. But it is also a lot of volunteering. It's a lot of recruiting people who are wired to have these conversations. And sometimes the people who think they're wired to have these conversations actually aren't very helpful. And I say that with all the grace and kindness that I can muster. I really do think their intentions are good. But if they are walking into some of these families who have experienced crisis, who have grown up in really broken, confused circumstances around money, maybe they have credit card debt or medical bill debt or some other structure that is really burying them, and the coach wants to apply some really sophisticated financial planning technique, or they want to immediately start talking about investing strategies or Roth IRAs or all kinds of things that confuse the issue, rather than deal with the person who's in crisis, give them hope, give them dignity, treat them with kindness and warmth, and move them out of the emotional turmoil that has gotten them stuck, or the self-doubt that might be breaking them down. There is so much more to these circumstances than just math. And a lot of times the people who volunteer for these coaching roles are really good at the math, but they need to be good at the emotional and relational work. That's actually the more important work here. The math isn't actually that hard. And these individuals who are struggling that need more guidance, it's not really because they are struggling to do the math. Most of the time, these are not math problems. These are emotional issues. These are spiritual issues. These are relational challenges that they're facing, and they are way, way, way more complicated than just doing a basic budget. And so we need to start with coaches who are really well trained in how to have forward-looking, hopeful conversations. We actually, in our coach training at Good Sense, which we have a link to in our show notes, we train people on how to make sure they're asking really helpful questions. Make sure we're phrasing those questions in a way that don't kind of hide a judgment in them. Like, why would you do that, for example? Or what were you thinking, right? Those are horrible ways to ask questions. Or maybe a lot of times people will focus in these financial coaching conversations on the past. Tell me how you got here. Tell me all the terrible decisions that you made that led to this point. They won't say it like that, but you get what I'm saying. Let's relive all the things that you feel shame about, that you feel like you failed in. Let's just rehash all that. And they think somehow that that's being helpful, but it's not. It's ripping wounds back open. And so we want to start from this point. I actually don't care very much about how you got here. I'm more concerned about where we're going and what's it going to take to get where we want to go, rather than continuing to self-flagellate and beat ourselves up for what got us here in the first place. That's the kind of work that our coaches need to be trained in. And so what we want to think about here, because the audience of this conversation, that one-on-one coaching, typically is going to be, in the way that we think of it, the lane one, maybe some lane two families. So the lane one families are people who need some path to stability. They're struggling. They're having a really hard time making all of this work. And they're in these constantly emotionally charged, kind of panicked situations. And we need to bring a stable, steadying presence into that coaching environment. Sometimes we get lane two people. Those are the people who are really needing clarity. They have resources, but they're not really paying attention enough to know where they're going and why. And so both of those conversations are more complicated than just let's sit down and do a budget together. It takes more effort, more intention, and a deeper commitment to relational growth. And so one of the things for those of you who might be leading these ministries, it is very natural to go and find the CPAs and the CFPs and the people who do this for a living and say, come on in and coach. And I'm not saying those people aren't the right people. I'm a certified financial planner. I have coached tons and tons of people for my church in this type of circumstance. But what is more important is that they have the skill set to be able to meet people where they are, love them, give them respect and dignity, and give them hope and clarity for what steps need to be taken. That is a much higher priority than if they have a designation, a CPA, CFP. It's great if they have both. That's wonderful. The reason why that relational skill is so critical is because many of these families that you interact with that are asking for this one-on-one direction need more than just rules and guidance of the specifics of how to. They have probably, many of them, read books, listened to podcasts. They know that they're doing it wrong. That's why they're asking for help. They can hear all the time, read articles all the time that tell them how they should be doing it, but they're not. And the reason is it's a deeper, bigger issue than just knowing the right answer. It's what Paul talks about in Romans. I do the thing I don't want to do, and I don't know why. We need to help these individuals and these families uncover why. Why are they tripping on themselves in certain areas? Why do they see a repeated pattern in their financial lives? Is it because they're medicating a sense of inadequacy or a sense of failure, and they're spending money to make themselves feel better? Is it because they're climbing and trying to strive for a certain status so that they can feel significant or important? Those are way bigger issues to solve than the credit card debt that they might have as a result of that. And so that's the kind of relationship we want these coaches to be building. Deep relational conversations that help uncover the motivations that are leading to these outcomes rather than just trying to fix the outcomes. Because if we don't solve how that got there in the first place, it's coming back. For sure it's coming back. And so we need to be non-judgmental, grace-filled, and warm in the way that we peel away the things that might uncover what's lying at the root of some of these financial issues. That coach needs a really solid understanding of biblical principles around money. They need to be able to walk with confidence, knowing what the framework is that they're operating in. And again, that happens at that congregational level. But if the coach doesn't have those things really deeply embedded, then when their client, these families that they're coaching and they're working with, when they hit a fork in the road, they're going to be turning and asking this coach for wisdom in how to navigate that fork in the road, and they need to be able to steer them consistently in the direction of that biblical framework for faithful stewardship. And so we need to teach it at the high level, train it deeply in the coaches so that they can then embed it in the conversations that they're having with their coaching clients. That coach is an accountability partner in a lot of ways. They're a cheerleader. They are rooting for these families to succeed and to thrive. When that relationship crosses over into investment advisor or financial planner, we have muddied the waters between a coach that the church is providing to help bring wisdom and guidance and a professional advisor that is actually doing a job. We don't want these coaching client families to see these coaches as their financial planner. And we don't want a financial planner to be selling their services to our church's coaching clients, because that service is actually not the most important piece to this puzzle. It's the relationship. It's the wisdom conversations. It's the guidance and the cheerleading and the encouragement, as well as the expectation that they will do the work that it takes to move forward for their family. And so we don't want to mix those things and make that confusing for either the coach or the client. One of the ways we recommend setting really healthy boundaries in that space is by making sure that those two stay always separate. That there is not a situation where an advisor that happens to be a coach is in there selling product or selling their services. And we need to make sure that the coaching client sees this coach correctly, that they are a mentor, they're giving direction, they're giving wisdom, but they are not actually providing financial services. These conversations, by definition, should get really specific. We should be in the weeds of blocking and tackling, of actually building and tracking our spending plan, of understanding what our non-negotiables are, of really diving into our priorities as a family, and then making sure that those priorities line up with our decision-making. That is really deep work, but it is really important that that work actually gets done. And so one of the things that we like to see is that the expectation for the next meeting with this coach is that the client is doing their work. And so every time that the coach meets with the client, there is an expectation of their homework. These are the 3 things you need to do. I'm not going to give you 33 things because you won't do any of them. But I'm also not going to continue to meet with you unless you are doing the things I'm asking you to do. And so if you call me and you say you want to get together again, I will say, have you done those 3 things we talked about? And if the answer is no, you need to do those 3 things before we get back together. There's an exchange of effort and work for access to the coach. And that's how you prevent those codependent relationships where the person just wants to get together with the coach and talk about all the things they're doing wrong and how hard it is, but they aren't actually putting in the work to actually improve and to get better. And so the coach ends up in this constant conversation that feels hopeless and feels stuck, and they end up mired in the same muck that a lot of times these families can find themselves in. The only way we get people out of that situation is if we stay out of the situation and we pull them away from it. If we get in it with them and we're stuck in it with them, now we're both drowning in the quicksand. And so we need to make sure that there are really clear boundaries and really clear expectations, that the exchange for more of my advice and my time is that you have done the work that I told you need to do before we would get together again. That's the currency that we're working in. That's how that becomes more of an accountability, and it builds on itself. And then we start to see success and we celebrate that. You've done the 3 things I asked you to do. That's fantastic. Look what that means for your family. Now here's your next 3 things. Because there's always more. There's always further that we can go in faithful stewardship. There's always a healthier place than where we are now. And so having that coach moving them forward through those incremental steps, but expecting those steps to be done before we meet again, that's how you establish this in a way that really does lead to ongoing progress and thriving and flourishing for the families in your congregation that need this kind of specific help. And so when we're talking about money in these individual relationships, we are getting into really specific application based on their circumstance. We're taking these high-level concepts that we've taught at the congregational level, and then we are telling these families how they best apply those same big ideas in their family's individual situation. And it is what ties this idea to my circumstance. It's the missing piece in a lot of cases where if churches talk about specifics and that higher level, because it doesn't apply to my circumstance, I reject it, I ignore it, I don't even get how it works. But when we can tie these things, the big idea to my circumstance and how it works for me and my family, all of a sudden it makes so much more sense. And the truth that Jesus has been teaching us all along, that Scripture has been showing us all along about how we step into faithful stewardship, comes alive. And it starts to really take hold of our hearts. It starts to change these families who up until now have had plenty of guidance and rules and alwayses and nevers. Don't ever do this and always do that. But they've never been able to link it to their circumstance because they haven't had someone hold their hand and walk with them in their circumstance. This coaching ministry, if your church is trying to launch something like this, or they've already got something, but maybe it's not working quite as well as you would hope, this is one of the most beautiful gifts that you can give to families in your community, because it helps them find whole new levels of freedom and peace and steadiness. It breaks cycles of conflict in marriages. It releases people from fear and anxiety. It helps families thrive in ways that I think are really unique to this particular conversation, because money is what is competing in our hearts for affection, for love, for loyalty. And when we can break that tie and get it under control and get some wisdom to walk in, it allows us to fall further in love with the owner of all those resources and want desperately to honor him with all that we are. Well, thank you so much for listening to the Faithful Steward podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for links and other information that we mentioned in today's episode. Also, be sure to check out our website at goodsensemovement.org to get all the resources we offer churches to help equip them in teaching financial stewardship to their community. If you have any questions or any topics you want to make sure we cover on our show, you can email me at jameslenhoff@goodsensemovement.org. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you all have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.